was first used in the colony of Louisiana in 1713 to designate a slave born in the colonies, right? So initially the word Creole meant a slave born here. By the mid-18th, early 19th century, you found white descendants of the French settlers in this area, white descendants of the Spanish settlers, also referring to themselves as Creole, as a delineation between incoming French Canadians, Acadians, Americans. It was that nativist sentiment. We are of this place, right? So we have to be careful when we say Creole, because this family who owned this house was Creole, but the slaves that they owned were also Creole. The language that they all spoke was Creole. The culture, the food, the music, everything is Creole. So there's this argument now, of which I am a part in the historical community, that Cajun is sort of a misnomer, because what we just ate when we ate that jambalaya wasn't Cajun. You know, the Acadians didn't make jambalaya in Acadie. It's Creole, because it's a product of this colony, of this area, of this region. So I would define myself then as a Creole of Cajun descent, right? See what I'm saying? So we have to be careful. This home, though, was built circa, which circa is our keyword in history, because it means je ne sais pas, right? Around, right? Je connais pas. About 1850, right? We know that there was a structure on this property as early as 1790. It might be the subfloor of this house, but it might not. What it looks like to me, and I'm not an architectural historian, but I know several architectural historians, and I play one on TV, right? I slept at a Holiday Inn Express house. It looks to me that the house was built over the period of about 10 years. 1815 would be a good date then, because the bottom floor is brick. The second floor is wood beams infilled with bousillage. But the third floor uses an American building technique of vertical trusses. So I suspect the house was begun in the French Creole administration and finished under an American administration, because it seems like the architect changed at some point in the construction of the house to go from these diagonal beams on the second floor to the vertical beams on the top floor. When the house was first constructed, it was one room deep. The windows on the left, underneath the gable, was the center of the house. Where the windows are on the right, that was a porch, just like that porch. Pierre Olivier de Vinzin, and if you're taking notes, his full name was actually Pierre-François Honoré Olivier de Vinzin de Clozel. Répétez, s'il vous plaît. Pierre was the man most likely involved in the construction of his house. He built it as a summer home. He lived in New Orleans on Frenchman Street. And, well, everybody who was anybody lived in New Orleans. Right. So he lived in New Orleans. He built it as a summer home. His son Charles inherited this house in 1840. The first thing Charles did to turn it from a summer home into a family plantation home is doubled the size of the house by enclosing this porch and then adding this gallery porch to the house. So you can see where the roof line changes. Mm-hmm. That's additions, right? When the house was first constructed, it faced Bayou Teche. Bayou Teche is about 400 yards this direction. When Charles made his addition, though, he made that the front porch and this the back porch. Because by the mid-19th century, your wealthy people were not traveling by the bayou. Your wealthy people were traveling by carriage, wagons, buckboards on the highway, right? Because the American era brought American ideals to Louisiana. Americans are not boat people. Americans are horse people in the 19th century. Right? So your wealthy were traveling that way, and it was only the poor white trash like our families who were still using the bayou to get around. So you didn't want your house to face the alley, you wanted your house to face the road. Right? So as we walk through the house then, we're not talking about it in terms of its 1815 construction, because the house has been changed so much to turn it into a plantation home. We're talking about it then in terms of a Creole structure mid-19th century. By 1850, Olivier de Clozel, Charles, had between 30 and 40 slaves and about 400 acres. 250 of those acres were in sugar. To put that in perspective, this plantation would produce about 50 hogsheads of sugar a year in a good year. A hogshead's a barrel about this tall by that wide, right? put it in perspective, St. John's Sugar Mill right down the road here did 6.2 million tons of sugar last year, right? And there's 5 more sugar mills in Louisiana, right?
Wow.
So Louisiana is 4th in the world in sugar production, behind Cuba, Brazil, and the Philippines. Right?
Cuba's first?
Brazil is first. Cuba is second. Sugar likes hillsides. We don't have hillsides, right? So you'll notice when you see a sugar field, your rows are this tall. They build a fake hill for the sugar, right? Brazil has hills, so they lead the world in sugar production because they can harvest sugar when it's ripe. We have to harvest sugar before the first frost. Brazil doesn't have a frost, right? So Brazil harvests in February and March when the sugar is this big around. We harvest it in October to avoid the frost when it's this big. So again, though, we're talking about the house mid-19th century. Right?
Where were the slave quarters?
So when you drove in, there's a pasture on the right with horses in it. There's 2 big live oaks in that pasture. You can see back there. The slave cabins were a semicircle around those live oaks. We found in an archaeological expedition in 1975, they found the footprint of 5 of those cabins. So we know they were there. What we've done, as with me as the curator here, we have several of these oaks are over 300 years old, so they're on the live oak registry. They have numbers, but they didn't have names. So we had them reclassified to give them names. So we have 10 live oaks now that are in the process of being renamed, and we're naming them after 10 of the slaves on the plantation. So there will be the Joseph oak, the Benedict oak, the Comet oak, the Horace oak, named after some of the enslaved peoples on this plantation. Because it doesn't make sense to me to have the Olivier oak and the Charles Olivier oak and the Pierre Olivier oak, because the lived history of this place is not the lived history of the 7 whites who lived in this house. It is the lived history of the literal hundreds of slaves who inhabited this property from the 1790s until emancipation in 1864.
Charles and
Right. So what I want you to take away then from this tour is issues of creolite, issues of slavery, and issues of sugar production. So those are your questions. If you have questions about those 3 things, I can answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll just make it up.
revisionist history.
Yeah. When you get your master's degree, they lean in and they say, congratulations, just make it up.
Because you have the authority to.
Well, but you can see the saw marks.
Wow. Yeah. Or the ads, whatever they use to shave it.
Well, yeah,
So-
that's what they have.
So the house is constructed, and this is, to me, this is what's one of the really interesting things. How many materials go into a building today, right? Your house, right? Tile, house wrap, and insulation, and all this crap, right? This house is built with 7 materials total, right? Clay, cypress, black locust in the pegs to hold the building together. There's no nails.
Huh.
So clay, cypress, black locust, cedar for the roof, right? Mud, moss
For the boozy
for the bousillade, right? For the bousillade, and limes, and that's the entire construction of this house, right? Imagine that, right? In fact, we had a guy that worked here, Tommy. I got him to do an experiment for me. He has a bass boat. He went along the bayou, and we were on our phone, and we were walking, and I had him check his depth gauge as he went along the bayou. And the depth along the bayou goes 8 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, 8 feet, 8 feet, 8 feet, 20 feet. Those spots where it gets deep, that's where they threw lead-lined barrels into the bayou to scoop the clay out of the bayou to make the bricks to build this house.
These bricks
Right?
too?
Yeah, no, these bricks are 20th century.
Oh.
These are clay bricks. So look how thick they are, right? The walls are 14 inches thick. So that's 4 layers of brick to make the structure. So to put that in perspective, the bottom floor of this house probably has in the neighborhood of 185,000 bricks to make just this.
Nowadays it's just dry.
Right. All of these marks are broad axe marks scoring these beams. This house is built very rustically compared to other plantation homes of the era. This would be a medium-sized, small plantation. A word that is used a lot in historical communities is called the plantocracy, right? It's the aristocracy of the planter class. These people would have been in it because they were large landholding slave owners. But to compare them with like the Moutons, who had 10,000 acres and 800 slaves, the Weeks, who owned Chateaux on the Teche in New Iberia, who had 5,000 acres and 1,000 slaves. This is 400 acres and 35 or 40 slaves. So a much smaller property. So the house is fairly rustic. Oh,
This is my. I'm gonna say this is my favorite room for every single room.
you're welcome to. I'm going to take the ropes down with the assumption that you guys are not going to fouiller. So this is one of the rooms then that was at one time a porch. 1840, this was all enclosed. Now the house has changed quite a bit even in the 20th century. The last family to inhabit the house were the Greggs. The Greggs moved out in 1917 for this to become a state commemorative area. The Greggs changed a lot in the home. They painted, they whitewashed. Originally, these walls would have been raw brick and raw wood. They added this brick floor. The original floors in the downstairs of this house were dirt, right? And they put glass in all these windows, right? Originally, there would have been no glass downstairs. This is what's known as a raised Creole cottage. Raised being the key word, meaning your living area is raised. Acadian-style architecture tends to have a structure lifted up off the ground on pavers or on stumps, right? In a raised Creole cottage, by virtue of the second floor being the premier étage, the primary living space, that area is raised. So then downstairs are working spaces, right? Hence the dirt floor. There's an expression now, dirt floor poor, which is a misnomer because these people were fairly wealthy and had dirt floors. Why bother changing the floor downstairs in a floodplain? You're going to have to replace it, right? So they added all of that. Most likely, these rooms would have been used as working spaces in the 19th century. So that's why this room is furnished with tools and stuff. Chaz, what's your favorite artifact?
Okay, so this lovely thing is a butter churn, and obviously, lovely. You churn the butter.
Right.
My favorite thing is that the same company that made these
In Louisville, Kentucky. They went out of business in 1865 during the Civil War because nobody was buying butter churns anymore. They were buying butter because by that point the butter industry had mechanized due to the war effort. So this company out of Louisville had a big woodworking factory. They needed to retool and become something. So they became Louisville Slugger based on that. It's the same company.
Wow.
They just extruded those handles a little bit.
Right.
And they opened in 1869 as the Louisville Slugger Company, and in 1870 the National League was created. So Louisville Slugger, until 1900, this company produced about 5,000 of these, and by 1900 they had produced over 1 million baseball bats. So I think they sort of hit their stride when they stopped making butter churns. Right. In fact, if you go to the Louisville Slugger Museum, there's a room in the corner of their museum that says Our Humble Beginnings. This company started making hand-carved porch railings and swinging dairy churns. So there's a room full of dairy churns at the baseball museum.
Baseball.
I think it's
better.
humble beginnings making butter churns going into, making baseball.
So this is some cool stuff. I found these on a canoeing trip. The house, the colors of this house, we don't know about the shutters and the eaves because they've been changed so many times. But we do know that the house's original color was yellow. Creoles paint bright colors, right? Americans whitewash. Right? Tom Sawyer was whitewashing a fence, right? He wasn't painting it yellow. The president lives in the White House. What color is the Washington Monument, right? It's white. That's the American angle, right? Creoles paint bright colors. The example of that, walk through the French Quarter and count the white buildings, right? There's like 5. Everything else is purple and blue and pink and things like that. So this is the material from which the paint was made. This is yellow ochre. So this is how you make yellow paint. You add oil to this and chalk to thicken it, and that would be your base yellow. The reason we went with red and green as the accent most of the enslaved people on this plantation and on all of these plantations were kidnapped from Senegal. And the colors of the Senegalese flag are yellow, red, and green. So we knew the house was yellow. We went with red and green for the shutters as an homage to the people of Senegal who were enslaved to create this plantation.
Cool.
Now this here is my favorite.
This is your favorite. So the office of the plantation. Now, when we cross this way, we walk from the additions to the original rooms. So this was one of the original 1815 rooms, and you can tell those rooms because they all have fireplaces in them. There's one central chimney that feeds 4 rooms of fireplace. The plantation was on what we call sections, Section 79 and Section 80. Both are about 200-acre sections. They're both this direction. We're right on the edge of Section 79 right now. So your plantation went this way. The only original structure to the plantation that we still have is the home itself. By the mid-19th century, though, there was probably between 25 and 30 buildings on this property. Because a plantation has to be remembered, it's not the home, it's the operation, right? It's the village that makes up the plantation. Slave cabins, sugar mill, smokehouses, slaughtering barns, all of these things make up a plantation, right? What's the artifact in here you want to? So we know that this was most likely the office because that safe has been here since 1852. Wow.
Because it's really hard to move.
Yeah.
That.
It weighs about 500 pounds, so it was put there and never moved. The safe would have been in the office.
And my favorite part about it is that it's like, well, yeah, I get it, it's a safe, but where's the lock? Very interesting mechanism.
It's got a hidden locking mechanism.
Didn't you find the key and opened it? There was like a piece of paper.
Yeah, it was a blank piece of paper. That's
Yeah.
the only thing.
Worth it, definitely.
Cool.
I also really like the fact that. I've never seen it open. Huh? It sounds heavy.
Right. Ah.
Thanks. Look how big that thing is.
Well, the reason it weighs so much is because A, it's made out of pig iron, but B, there's slots in the back along the top. When you'd receive it, you'd pour sand into the walls, and that would make the interior flame retardant, right? So you've got it, most of the weight goes in the door, right? You've got all these tumblers and everything. But yeah, so your safe would have been in the office. We have documents showing the packet ship that arrived from Baltimore with this safe on it in 1852.
What would they keep in it? Cash?
Namely, you'd have cash in it, yeah, but you'd also have your deeds. You'd have all of your paperwork of your slaves to prove ownership.
And he could sit here and look out that window at the slaves in operation.
You could see everything functioning. What's that?
Little binoculars.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things I've added that I think are cool.
Right. Documentation of people who know
So, the dining room, there's evidence that in the 19th century there was a cypress floor in here. So the only room in the house that would have had cypress. To an early 19th century Creole. Now remember this, Americans are mimicking wealthy British, right? Americans, by virtue of being descendants, in many cases, from the British, the wealthiest Americans, are mirroring wealthy British. Anybody see the show Downton Abbey? Right? It's a good example, right? You have a breakfast room, and then you have a formal dining room, and you have an informal dining room, and you have a salon to receive people, and then you have a day room, all this crap, right? Early 19th century Creoles, no. There's bedrooms for sleeping, and there's a parlor. Parlor, the word parlor comes from the French word en parle, to talk, right? You have sleeping rooms, you have a talking room. And if that's not enough for you, piss off, right? The dining room then, this is an 1850 addition to the house. Because Charles, being a wealthy Creole planter, who is he competing against? Who is he entertaining? Wealthy Americans, right? They expect to be fed in a dining room. So what we can tell here is that he turned a downstairs working space into a dining room. The bricks and the mantle, this is this room downstairs has a mantle, the office didn't. Mantles are added because how else are you going to illuminate the room at night? You have to have sconces, right? So the mantle's added, the bricks are different, so that's an addition to the room. The cypress floor would have been added. Chaz is pumping the chafmouche for you. So this is not the original chafmouche to the house. The original chafmouche was stolen in 1955. I don't know why anybody needs a hand carved traditional Creole chafmouche.
Right.
But chafmouche literally means to chase flies. That's
Not a fan.
it's a ceiling fan.
That makes sense.
There is no vernacular French phrase in the 19th century for ceiling fan.
Because of all of the like livestock and
Yes.
all that would have been around.
Right. So the next room is too small for us to all fit in. So we'll talk about it here and then y'all can walk through if you can. So Chaz always says, this is my favorite room, that's my favorite room. Because of the story that goes with it. Okay. So the Oliviers owned many slaves. And there's this popular image in American minds that enslaved people were field hands, right? But that's not the case. Right? They had field hands on this plantation. But the house wasn't built by the white Creole owners. It was built by enslaved specialists, right? Professional woodworkers who were enslaved, right? The blacksmith on this plantation who built and maintained farm implements was a professional blacksmith who was an enslaved person. The cook was an enslaved person. The master of the sugar house, the person whose job it was to make sure they produced sugar, was a slave bought for a lot of money in New Orleans who had trained professionally to produce sugar, right? So you have to get through this mindset that slaves are field hands, right? This plantation had 35 or 40 slaves. 10 of them were professionals, right? And in many cases, much like we have work crews today, right? You have a guy whose job is, he owns a roofing company. Well, today he owns a roofing company, he has 10 employees who build the roof. He comes, tells you what you need, and then those 10 guys build it. Same thing in the 19th century, except that it was a white slave owner who said, here's what you need, and then he put his professional enslaved people to work to build that roof, right? So this is Benedict's room. Benedict was the domestique. This next room we're going to go into. The domestique, the domestic servant of this plantation. She would have raised the children in this plantation, kept the house clean, served the meals, all of these things. What I love about Benedict was emancipated by Pierre Olivier in 1840. When he emancipated her, he described her as an invalide, an invalid. He said she was too old to work. And he was emancipating her for her good service over his lifetime. She raised him, right? So she was in her 60s at this point. But she proved him wrong, because she lived another 30 years. Okay? Benedict managed in those 30 years to free both of her sons who were enslaved, one on this plantation and one on the neighboring plantation, right? Norbert and Joseph were her two sons. So we have an interview from the Works Progress Administration during the Depression with Norbert's son. And everything we know about Benedict then comes from Norbert's interview in the 1930s, right? What I love Benedict is she's emancipated. She says, thank you for the freedom, asshole, and then goes to New Orleans and works for the next 30 years of her life to save up money to free her children.
And what would she do? What worked this way?
She went to the St. Charles Hotel. She worked in the kitchen and in the laundry rooms of the St. Charles Hotel. Doing the same thing she did here, but for money. So she freed both her sons. Now, she's such a broad. She never freed her husband. Right. There's no more to the story. Even Norbert's grandson in 1930, when he was doing an interview, he didn't know. He's like, I don't know. He must have fucked up because she was mad at him. Yeah. And he died enslaved. You know, she lived into her 90s. So think about this woman. This is a woman born in the late 1700s. She saw the French flag flying over Louisiana, the Spanish flag flying over Louisiana, the American flag flying over Louisiana, the War of 1812, the Civil War. She saw all of this through the lens of an enslaved person, and then later an emancipated person working, right? unfortunately, in historical circles, we have this thing that's called the Great Men of History, right? How many books are there about Washington and Jefferson, right?
Plenty.
Wouldn't it be awesome to have a book from her eyes of Louisiana from 1780 to 1870 when she died? You know, like that would be a fascinating journey. You know, so this is Benedict's room. When I first started here, this room was a storeroom. They just had a bunch of barrels and shit. And I was like, why are y'all calling it that? They said, well, we don't know what the room was. And I'm like, well, it's a plantation. You don't have a storeroom. You have barns and outbuildings and silos and corn cribs and all that crap for storing stuff. So this room has been described over the past 100 years as a sick room, but that you didn't find those on Creole plantations. That's an American thing. You put the sick people in one room so they don't affect the rest of the house. That's not the case. It's been described as an office. Well, why would the office be on this side of the house when the plantation went that way?
And that one had a big safe in it.
It had the safe in the fireplace, right? So if you read the transcript of Norbert's son's interview, he said his grandmother Benedict was the domestique for this family in St. Martinville at the Olivier plantation. And he said that she had favored status. She lived in the house with the family. So when I read this, I said, okay, what room in this house would have been Benedict's? So when you pass by and look in it, it's the smallest room downstairs in the working spaces of the house with the family upstairs. It's the only room in the house that only has 2 avenues of airflow, a door and a window. Every other room in this house has 3 or 4 avenues of airflow. So smallest room downstairs in a floodplain with the least ventilation, that's probably Benedict's room. Right? So now it's furnished as Benedict's room. So,
It's like, oh, okay, so you get to sleep in the house, but you also get to sleep in the house. You're not
well, why don't y'all take the car? You don't need to run.
He's actually going on. You gotta go do that.
Yeah, you're going to run a mile, Chaz. Yep.
Yeah, you are.
The crutches are a nice touch.
What's using all that eat, right?
You can keep saying what's the favorite birthday.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, it's okay. Put them on the deck. That's fine.
Bye.
Benedict's room.
Did you say black locust before?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's no stupid questions, right?
Sure. Well, no, there's just.
That just sounded interesting to me.
So the house is built with what's called a mortise and tenon joint. Are you familiar with mortise and tenon?
Yeah.
So this is a mortise and tenon joint.
Okay.
So you use a chisel and you cut a hole in a beam, right? And then you take your next beam that needs to go into it and you carve off the edges until it fits into here, right? So that fits in place. And then you drill a hole and you hammer in a peg. And what that does is it pegs it in place, right? So this whole house, this is a mortise and tenon joint, pegged with a peg in over the top. Cypress is a really good wood to build with, but it tends to expand a little in the summer and contract a little in the winter, which is why when you walk in a lot of old houses, you hear a creak, 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 creak. It's because the wood has over hundreds of years expanded and contracted. Black locust, by virtue of being such a slow-growing, dense tree, does not expand or contract. So you use locust as a peg because no matter what, it's never going to want to split the wood or be too small to hold.
Makes sense, yeah.
Right? Yeah, I planted some black locust here when I started 8 years ago. I was like, we're going to have some locust to show people. And I planted the seedlings like this.
Yeah.
And they're about this tall now. And I had one of those moments where I was like, you freaking moron. The reason they built it with black locust because it took so long to grow it. It's so dense. So it's like, one day I'm going to harvest this and make a fortune selling locust. In 400 years. You can harvest this. So you'll notice when you get up here that the porch slopes. That's intentional. This keeps your rainwater draining off the porch. Ceilings are painted blue. Hunter, you know why ceilings are painted blue. No? So this is a very southern thing, right? And if you see it all over, Key West, everywhere else. Blue ceilings tend to repel bugs, wasps, dirt daubers, mosquitoes. They get confused because they see blue and they think of it as the sky. So you tend not to get nests and things like that under the eaves of your house. Now, folklore is interesting, right? In folklore, they call this haint blue. A haint is a ghost, right? So they say, when do you see ghosts? You don't see ghosts in the daytime, right? You only see them at night. So if you paint your ceilings blue, the ghost will always think it's daytime, and they won't come in your house.
I like it.
I've been here 8 years.
Logical.
Double duty.
We don't have wasps, and we don't have ghosts. So
Hey,
it might work for both.
Yeah,
It might
Right?
work.
I like it.
Like there's raid wasp killer, but there's also flying insect killer. It like kills everything.
Yeah,
So this works for all of it. It's like a multi-purpose paint.
very cool.
no ghost.
That he knows of.
The ghosts are all in the attic. Where there's no blue ghosts. So you feel the floor here slopes too, right?
Yeah.
Because this used to be the porch.
Right.
Oh.
So this whole side of the
man.
house is enclosed. Right?
Do that through people.
Sure. You can't play marbles in this room.
Right.
You know. So most likely what they're constructing here would be called cabinet rooms. Okay. And you see these a lot. You ever been to Pat O'Brien's in New Orleans and eat upstairs at Pat O'Brien's? They have, you go up the stairs, there's like a big dining room, and then all along the walls are these little dining rooms for, you know, private parties. Those are called cabinet rooms. When you take a space and then you partition it into smaller spaces, right? So if you look right here, there's a slot under this beam. That's probably where a wall was in the 19th century, right? To make two small rooms. Okay? Most likely this was the salon, the ladies' space in the house. Now remember, the Oliviers owned several homes. Pierre Olivier lived in New Orleans. Frenchman Street. You familiar with Frenchman Street, New Orleans? It's the very outside edge of the quarter. It's between the quarter and the Faubourg Marigny. Right? If you walk down Frenchman Street go in the evening when the music is playing, best time. Walk down Frenchman, at the corner of Frenchman, there's a restaurant. It's called the Praline Connection Restaurant. That is the site of the Olivier townhouse. That's where Pierre Olivier lived. When he died, he left Charles his plantation home, his summer home, and his townhouse. So this family reversed it. Pierre lived in New Orleans and then came here for the summer. This family lived here and went to that house in the winter in New Orleans. Because winter was the entertaining season in New Orleans. The dancing, the parties, right? Right after Christmas, you know, from Christmas to the biggest party of the year, Creole culture, right? Mardi Gras, right? And then after Mardi Gras, Lent starts, right? 40 days to nurse your hangover. And they would come back to their plantations, right? Following the seasons. So you had an entertaining space in the house, but most of their entertaining is being done in New Orleans. That's where you had to be seen, right? Both daughters in this family married men from New Orleans, in New Orleans, and lived in New Orleans. Right? So there is a ladies' space in the house, but remember, most of your entertaining is happening there. White, wealthy Creoles, the center of their culture was New Orleans. In poor Creole and poor Cajun families, the center of your culture is the home, right? Barn dances at your home, fête d'oeuvres at your home, boucheries at your home. In Creole, wealthy Creole culture emanated from New Orleans. Right? So like that said, my favorite room in the house. Right? I like this room a lot. It's the one that the ladies I work with let me furnish, so it tends to be a little more masculine. This is the parlor. This is the entertaining space of the house. This is where the family entertained. This is where guests were entertained. Evidence that the only wallpaper ever in this house was in this room. You're only in a wallpaper room, other people are going to see, right? If you look at these photos, this gives you an idea of these inhabitants. This is the youngest son of the family, the last Olivier to own the house, Charles Darnville Olivier, and his wife, Marie Corinne Mouton Olivier. And what's fascinating about them is that he's a French Creole. He described himself as Creole. She's an Acadian. She's a Creole of Acadian descent. She's a Mouton, right? And it's very rare to see Creoles and Acadians marrying prior to the Civil War. And they married in 1850. Right? So they're an interesting couple. And he'd be a handsome fellow if he didn't have the Princess Leia. You know why that is? They wore their hair like that so that your hair wouldn't get messed up by your top hat.
You just do
Whenever I have school groups, the kids all line up right here, and I always like to look at one of them. You know,
Did you make them with resin?
yeah.
Nice.
Just pour resin on.
That's cool.
I told my boss I need brandy glasses, so she got me some, so we resined them. This is one of my favorite artifacts, right? Any ideas? It's a mustache cup.
Oh my god.
So when you drink,
Yeah.
you didn't get coffee and tea in your mustache.
That's very cool.
Hmm.
Isn't that cool?
That is cool.
Yeah. So the parlor. In the 19th century, and again, like I said, this house has changed a lot. In the 19th century, there was a staircase that led up to this porch. So as guests arrived from the highway, they would come up the stairs into the parlor. You didn't want them downstairs in the workspace. You wanted them upstairs. This room has 2 French doors. The next room we're going to go in only has 1. So guests knew when they arrived to come to the room with the open doors. Y'all have questions?
Yellow.
Yeah, that's the early 20th century yellow. This
Right.
So that's the tree here we're telling you about, the Gabriel. My favorite tree on the property. And again, I'd like to know Benedict's story, but I'd also like a story told from the point of view of this tree. Right. This tree was 200 years old 200 years ago when they built this plantation. You know, it's a 400-year-old library. The slaves who built this plantation sat under that tree for shade. You know, we used to have weddings here, but I stopped that as soon as my old boss retired and they made me curator. I stopped the weddings from happening here. People love to get married under the Gabriel oak, and I said, you know, we're not doing it anymore. We're not going to celebrate a joyful occasion on a property that spent years subjugating and marginalizing enslaved peoples. You know, this is not a joyful place, right? It's a place for learning and adapting and you know, things like that. I'm not saying we need to grieve. I'm saying we need to respect. You know? So these are all cypress beams, but think about it, right? This was a tree squared to make these beams. The staircase initially was right here. It went down to the ground. You see there's a couple of cypresses. Those are all that's left, but there used to be a double row of cypresses to the highway. So it made an archway as you'd arrive.
You know, I don't think I'm really stupid, but I'm just thinking about things I hadn't thought about before. Like the disparate prices for different slaves. I mean, they vary a lot based
Sure.
on their abilities to what they could do.
Usually you'd be looking at about 800 for a field hand.
But you were saying the
Blacksmith here would have cost about $2,000. So adjust that for inflation, that's about $24,000 in modern day money to buy a person. Right. And you know, we don't think of it often, but chattel slavery. If I owned this, I can break it. It's mine. I can do whatever I want with it. I can set it on fire. Right. Same thing with an enslaved person in the 19th century Louisiana. You own them. If you want to beat them to death, that's perfectly within your right.
well, there was a financial incentive there to have them more productive because you could get more money for them, right?
Well, sure, but there was also many instances where slave owners used slaves as an example to other slaves. We know that Pierre Olivier de Vezin shot his neighbor's slave for crossing his property at night, even though that slave had a pass. The slave survived. His name was Lupin. Lupin survived, but Pierre Olivier had to pay $500 in damages to his neighbor for having damaged his slave. Right? Charles Olivier whipped a slave to death. No, let me go back. Charles Olivier, a slave working in the sugar mill, cracked a sugar kettle by applying too much heat to it without putting enough water in it. And a sugar kettle was worth more than that slave. So he made an example of it. He hung him in the smokehouse by his hands, which, what does that symbolize? You are a piece of meat, right? He hung him in the smokehouse and then whipped him to death in the smokehouse and displayed his body for the enslaved people on his plantation. So yes, you're right, but he used that slave as an example to the rest of the slaves of this plantation. You are pieces of meat to me that I can do what I will, right? So there's a lot of people make the arguments, well, slaves were treated great so that it's a better return on invested capital. You know, it really,
They were treated like slaves.
well, yeah, I mean, if you, and I go back and I tell people this, I say, okay, if you owned all of the rights to my bodily processes, you determine when I pee, when I reproduce, when I eat, when I sleep, you could give me cake every day and free puppies, but it doesn't deny that you own my bodily processes, you know? So it's like, well, did they treat them well?
That's
Who
just
gives a
to
shit?
that's just
Right.
to make people feel better about a
Sure.
horrible situation.
Well,
Yeah.
and I get that question all the time. You know, did they treat them well? I'm like, okay, so demonstrably no. But why the fuck does that matter?
Right. Why does it matter?
So anyway, this is the master bedroom. Downstairs is brick. If you look in this wall panel right here, there's a glass pane that shows you your insides of your walls. They use Norman trusses, which are these diagonal beams, and you can see that they're in and hang your moustiquaire, your mosquito net.
Right.
But it's called a rolling pin bed because when you sleep on moss and cotton, it's this very lumpy material. The bed comes with a rolling pin to roll that stuff flush, right?
Wow.
Or as Kira calls it, the shut up stick.
Right.
I don't know, officer, it fell on him 4 times. I mean, it's the craziest thing. Right, yeah. In fact, a buddy of mine owns the Banana Courtyard Bed and Breakfast on Royale in New Orleans. And he came to visit, and he did the tour. And he was standing right there. He's talking about the bed, and he turned like green. I was like, are you okay? He goes, Phil, we have one of those beds in our master suite. And the damn thing was loose. I thought it was going to hurt somebody, so I screwed it down. And I was like, yeah. You just turned your historic New Orleans artifact into a bed. Well,
Part of the headboard.
But what's fascinating to me, though, about this is because it's not just that it's a bed. That's not what's fascinating to me. Let's think about it. You all have time for a thought experiment? All right. This bed is made out of solid walnut. Does walnut grow in South Louisiana?
No.
So, this bed was made in 1812. What happened in 1812?
The War of 1812.
But statehood happened in 1812, right? So, for this bed to have been made in 1812, this wood had to come from somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So, prior to 1812, with statehood, it was illegal for the Spanish and French citizens of New Orleans to trade with Americans. So, where did the wood come from? It was smuggled here, right? Our famous pirate in Louisiana, Jean Lafitte, he wasn't a pirate. He was a smuggler. He smuggled slaves, and he smuggled shit that Louisianians weren't supposed to have by waiting at the mouth of the Mississippi in Barataria Bay until nightfall and then sneaking that stuff up into New Orleans. So much of these artifacts, this is a mahogany armoire made in 1809. That mahogany didn't grow in Louisiana. You think these Creoles are paying the excise tax, the import tax, and the price to get hardwoods? No, they're going to wait for Jean Lafitte and his boys to smuggle that stuff in, right? So a lot of these artifacts that are on, like the New Orleans registries and our famous furniture archives, a lot of those are made out of smuggled stuff, right? Which is, it's a pirate bed, y'all.
That's pretty cool.
The doorway right here actually is kind of funny. That was 20th century. The house didn't have that in the 19th century. The family, the American family that lived in here last, probably got sick of having to go outside to get to other rooms, right? But people always say, oh, look how short they were. It's actually, that door can't be any taller. Because you see how these beams are diagonal? Right. With a diagonal beam, you have one that goes from the fireplace to the corner, so that door can't bisect that beam. Every beam in a Norman structure is load bearing.
Oh, wow. Right.
So the original doors, though, look how tall they are. Because you want air passing through the house. Right? The world's fanciest chamber pot. You know what that? Push on. Kids on my school groups really love this. I tell them, look, check out this toothbrush from the 19th century.
Oh, no.
Right? Why is this interesting? Well, what are the bristles made out of?
Horsehair.
Boar.
Boar.
Boar whiskers. And what's the bone? What's a boar jawbone? So this is a pig brush. Everything about this comes from the hog.
Wow.
Right? And they brush their teeth with it.
Don't tell Mary.
Right, yeah,
It's
no.
not fair.
It's not vegan fair trade. It's not a vegan fair trade toothbrush.
Everything about it's unfair.
So this is the girls' room. Again, though, there's a gap. So probably a cabinet room. I suspect the Oliviers had 7 children of their lifetimes living in this house. Only 2 survived to adulthood. They have children of their own. But one of their daughters raised 5 of their children here. And one of their sons raised 4 of his children here. So you always had babies in the house. I suspect then that you had a cabinet room, probably nursery and girls' room, right? The boys had the unique privilege of the 3rd floor as the garçonnière. That's the boys' space. Right? Where does hot air go? Right?
Yeah.
So that space sucks.
Yeah, I was about to say that's the
I
kind of
bet.
surprising about the 2nd floor being the living space. Like I get it because of the workspace, but also like you're getting into that heat zone.
Well,
I guess.
But look how tall the ceilings are.
Oh, that's true.
Downstairs is 8-foot ceilings. These are 12 foot.
Yeah.
Right. So look how tall your doors are. Right. Letting all the air pass through. There's a lot of reasons for it. One is you're in a floodplain.
Right.
Okay. Also think about, we tend not to think of it. We don't live in a slave culture. It's easier to defend the 2nd story in an uprising. Right. The bottom story is brick. Right. Part of the reason of that is it makes a much more firm footprint. But a lot of these homes, can you burn brick?
Right. You can't.
You
Yeah.
can't. So if the slaves were to uprise, they couldn't burn you out because they couldn't get the house.
You know,
lit.
I was going to ask earlier, why didn't they uprise? And I'm like, Bill, don't ask him a stupid question, but did they?
The largest slave insurrection in North America took place in New Orleans in
Okay.
1849.
And it's probably because they didn't have a lot of options. If after they uprose,
Where
they
do you want to go?
Right, yeah, that was
You
the
know?
issue.
Because especially in Louisiana, the most draconian slave codes in North America are along the Gulf Coast. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. The slave codes tend to be a little bit, I'm not going to say better, but a little less harsh the further north you go, right? Down here, though, the reason being, think about St. Martinville in 1850. If you did a population density of St. Martinville in 1850, a full 70% of the population of this parish were enslaved. So the slave laws were so draconian because if the slaves did rebel, they could kill all the white people in this parish before the gendarmes were dispatched to stop them.
Yeah, and the question is, why didn't they? And it's because
Where are you going to go?
Right, yeah.
You know, you can go west into Texas, which had slaves, slavery. You can go north into Arkansas, which was a slave state. You can go east into Mississippi, which was a slave state. You can't go to the coast, right? So where are you going to go? Up north, you're a slave in Maryland. Well, if you get away, you got to walk 100 miles, and bam, you're in a free state. Here it's 1,000 miles to get to a free state. So you found places like this up north, for example, in Georgia. You steal something, they might break your hand, cut off a thumb. Right here, hang them. Right, because they didn't want to encourage any sort of rebellion or uprising. But again, the largest slave insurrection in North America took place in New Orleans in 1849. Slaves starting at the plantation on the River Road north of New Orleans, the Whitney. And they started at the Whitney, and they started marching down the River Road towards New Orleans, picking up slaves as they went, arming themselves. They were going to take the federal arsenal in New Orleans to come back and kill all their masters. It was in total, I think it was about 400 slaves who rose up marching to New Orleans. New Orleans, at that time, the capital was not yet Baton Rouge. It was sort of Baton Rouge, but it was New Orleans. So they dispatched the National Guard, the militia. They hung a slave every quarter mile along the River Road to New Orleans as a demonstration to the slaves in the area. They killed every single one and hung them every quarter mile along the River Road. Right? The largest slave insurrection ever was Haiti, right? And it terrified Americans to think about Haiti. Right? Toussaint Louverture and his Haitian armies were ruthless to the whites of Saint-Domingue. They destroyed these people. They ripped them apart. There are incidences of Toussaint Louverture's mulattoes and mestizo slaves physically ripping plantation owners apart with their bare hands. Right? This is how angry they were. When that happened, Louisiana suddenly became 10 times more draconic. Every instance of theft or of anything was punished with castration, hobbling, death, right? Because they were terrified that what happened in Haiti would happen here. Because again, in 1850 in Louisiana, 70% of this parish was enslaved. 30 people out here. There's 35 people that live right here. There's 7 in this house. Those 35 people pick up shovels and hoes. They could kill everyone in this family before anybody knew, right? So, did that answer your question?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It was fear of reprisal, and it was fear of where you're going to go.
right. Well, the where you're going to go is an issue because, like you said, I mean, up north is a little bit they can get somewhere.
But what you found, though, too, is that there were instances of rebellion. They just wouldn't be throw off the yoke and kill, but theft was a major
I was
way
thinking,
to rebel.
they could poison the food. They could do subtle things if they
Even
want.
just sabotaging
Yeah.
the crops.
They did, yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff happened. Theft of food was the biggest one. The smokehouse here, as a good example, all these smokehouses often would have 5 and 6 locks on them because slaves would go and steal a little bit of meat, right? And it was a way to subtly rebel, right? Or when they're looking at you, you work really hard. As soon as they look away, you stop working as hard. Oops, I messed up this batch of sugar. Oops, right? They're just trying to subtly get at you, But you're talking, by the time this is a fully functioning plantation, slavery had been, it was illegal, the importation of slaves had been made illegal in America in 1802, right? So the slaves here then are 4th, 5th, 6th generation enslaved peoples, right? By that point, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents were all slaves, right? So you're living in a culture then that, I'm not saying that it's accepted within slave cultures, but it's sort of it's always been this way, and this is how it shall always be mentality, which is why I think it's heartbreaking that when emancipation comes to Louisiana, there are so many slaves who say, I don't know what that means, right? And that's heartbreaking. Not that they didn't know the word, that they didn't understand the concept.
Yeah.
Because they said, oh, you're free. What does that mean? You can do whatever you want. Well, like a white person? Oh, no. You're not a white person, but you're free. Well, what is freedom? And that to me is heartbreaking. Like, to imagine that feeling, not knowing what freedom means, So, have I sufficiently depressed everybody?
Yeah, hey, that's a depressing situation.